Hi, welcome to Yoga Selection. My name is Rod. Today's class, we've got a restorative sequence. We'll be focusing on relaxation and breath awareness. Make sure that you've got a yoga chair. We'll be using 2 bolsters, 3 blankets, 2 blocks and a belt, and we'll get started in lying back in Supta Baddha Konasana. Make sure you've got a belt. We'll also be using 2 blocks as support for our hips. I'll take whatever head support you need, be it a half-fold blanket or a 3-fold blanket. The block within reach to either side. When you lie back over the bolster, just have the back of the pelvis very gently touching the bolster, so not leaving a gap between the pelvis and the end of the bolster. Belt over the head, the shoulders, down the back, and then looping over the feet. The belt comes in between the knees, not around the outsides of the knees. Lying back, making sure that the belt doesn't slide up into the lower back. As we lie back, just checking the bolster, making sure that it comes into that area where the lower back joins the pelvis. Now the blocks, we can just comfortably wedge them there either side of the hips. Angle the blocks if the sharp edge is an irritant to the outer thighs. Just find a position there for the blocks. It might be a bit of trial and error for a few moments there, so that the knees are not raised up, but equally the harshness of the hip opening, just the edge of that taken off the pose, so that you can quite clearly, fully release and relax, letting your knees release down. And then arms comfortably out by the sides as you're ready. So the support there for the outer thighs, the support for the hips there, the blocks, it can help to reduce that tendency to jam the lower back up and away from the bolster. So just bring your attention there, the area where the spine and the pelvis join, just let it soften and release down into the support. We can let go there without the support letting it collapse. It's held nicely in position there, the curvature of the lower back retained as we soften, release and relax. That crease now at the point where the legs join into the torso, we sometimes call it the thigh crease. It also referred to often as the groin crease. And in this particular pose, that groin crease, it extends and eventually turns into the thigh crease. It's quite a large line in the body, in the pose. With your awareness, just trace it, moving from the inner groin area right the way around, all the way towards the outer hip area. That whole crease, make sure that the muscle fibre, the tendons in that region, softening, releasing away from the skin. If you need to, just use your hands to check that those areas have completely let go and softened. So the lower back relaxed, the groin, thigh creases soft, relaxed, the knees descending. And of course we'll be working not just with relaxation, releasing, relaxing today, but also with our breath and our breath awareness. So just bring the exhalation into those areas that we've just been mentioning, and feel that the exhalation is complete, finished, only when those areas are completely relaxed and soft. So more important than just feeling the completion of the breath moving through the nostrils, that we realize that the exhalation is complete when the abdomen relaxes, when the lower back relaxes, the hips, the knees descending. Once those areas have fully let go and softened, that's the completion of the exhalation. Quite naturally, spontaneously, we move to the next cycle of breath once that's complete. Check the moving to other regions of the body now. Check that your head is just lightly resting onto the support. And just notice if there might be just even a subtle tendency to be digging the back of the skull down into the support, or even resisting lifting the head a little off the floor, off the support. Make sure that the throat is completely relaxed, the muscles in the back of the neck completely relaxed, jaw muscles relaxed, shoulders relaxed, and integrating our breath with that awareness of that region of the body. Find with the inhalation, at the start of the inhalation, that those areas soften and release. The throat, the neck, the shoulders, the jaw, the eyes, making sure that those areas completely soft at the beginning of the inhalation. We've made just a couple of adjustments to the pose, more just letting go, relaxing, to feel how the breath has responded to that, the rhythm of the breath, the pacing of the breath, the depth of the inhalation, the height of the inhalation, the depth of the exhalation. You can think a little bit about the breath as being a wave-like movement, the top part of the wave, the top of the inhalation, the lowest part of the trough, the dip being the end of the exhalation. There's a nice even balance, oscillation between those two extremes. Okay, let's start to transition and come up now. We'll move the blocks, sitting up so that you can remove your belt. And we'll go to Adho Mukha Virasana, and we'll use a support. So we'll bring that bolster that we've just been lying back over, along with the blanket, and place it across the mat in front of the knees. Just looking to the screen if you're not sure. Now, some people are a little more restricted in their mobility with their knees, their hips. You might find that their hips sit a little higher. You can always put a blanket there if need be. If that is the case, you might need to boost the height of the bolster up with some folded blankets. It would just be like this, switching to a lengthways half-fold blanket. And then when we come forward, we want to make sure that the forehead comes firmly, securely down onto that blanket, but that we position the bolster in such a way that also our forearms can come up and rest onto the bolster as well. Now, if you're a more flexible person, smaller stature, you might find that the extra blanket there is more of a hindrance than a help. It shouldn't be that the neck feels overly compressed or curved in this position. Really just supporting the body in a nice, even, balanced version of Virasana forwards, one where you don't need to work so actively with your arms. So normally we're keeping the arms straight, we're pressing down with the hands, and that gives us the ability to anchor our hips. And here, just make sure that the hips are still anchored, but it's more releasing, letting go, making use of the effect of gravity so that the hips stay back and down. Imagine someone behind you with their hands just gently drawing the hips back, leaning their body weight on the pelvis so that it descends downwards. So, and then but feel it though, that the hips drawing back and down, it shouldn't then pull the forehead skin in the direction of the hairline, quite the opposite. As the forehead releases down into that support, we want to feel as if the forehead, the eyebrows, even the upper eyelids are just very gently drawn towards the cheekbones. If possible, see if you can get the eyes themselves just gently in contact with that support that your forehead is resting on, and then we can get that nice sense of the support, not just releasing and relaxing the forehead. It has an overall calming quality on the head, the contents of the head, but also helping the eyes to remain relaxed and shut. The upper eyelid, it lengthens away from the eyebrows towards the cheekbones as the eyes relax. So it's a reasonably firm, a reasonably firm contact there with the forehead onto the bolster. Make sure that your elbows are relaxed.
So just very light contact with the elbows onto the support, and that helps your shoulders to release and relax. As the shoulders release and relax, they, of their own accord, release back and away from the ears. Check the breath rhythm, the depth of the inhalation, the height of the inhalation, the depth of the exhalation. Don't try to force the breath, just releasing and relaxing, and see what rhythm tends to naturally emerge. When you breathe in, it's more than likely that the diaphragm pushes a little onto the abdominal area and makes it expand. You might even feel that contact there with the inner thighs as you breathe in, the abdomen reaching out and touching that area. Make sure that there's no restriction to that movement. Equally, when you breathe in, there should be that capacity for the chest to move a little bit forwards and away from the abdomen. Again, just make sure that there's no feeling of constriction there, of blockage there. The abdomen freely able to expand. The chest as well, able to expand. As you breathe in, it can move forwards. Okay, and then let's release. We'll do a supported version of Uttanasana. We'll use our chair now, so bringing our chair into position. We'll also lean back with our hips into the wall. We can customize the height that we're using. Taller people, stiffer hamstrings, tighter hamstrings, you might need to build the height of the bolster up. Smaller stature, more flexible body, you might need to reduce the height here. We want to get a support for the forehead and one with the torso more or less in a straight position, not rigidly straight. We just want to avoid that tendency for the back ribs to round and the chest to collapse. Distance away from the wall, you've got the backs of your heels roughly the length of your own foot away from the wall, and you start leaning back into the wall with your buttocks. And then as we come forwards, you might need to push the chair a little further away or bring it in a little closer so that we get a very similar effect to the previous pose. The forehead resting up onto the support. We've got our arms then folded, just loosely folded. Make sure that your fingers are able to lightly grip the point of the elbows so that the hands can just ensure that the elbows remain shoulder width. Now, there may be a natural tendency for the elbows to want to come wider than that, but if they do, they tend to do that at the expense of squashing the shoulders inwards towards the neck. So just allowing the elbows to release, remain shoulder width. The shoulders themselves, they can, as they did in the previous pose, quite naturally just drop back and away from the neck and the ears and relax. Same contact with the forehead. As the chest stays forwards, it just gently pulls that forehead skin and the eyebrows, potentially even the upper eyelids, just a little in the direction of the cheekbones. We want to avoid that sense of the forehead skin getting stretched back the other way towards the hairline. Something that can help with that is the awareness of your breath, your inhalation, so that when you breathe in, the ribs move forwards and away from the diaphragm. Just check that next couple of cycles of breath, breathing in. Whilst breathing in, the sternum bone, the front ribs, moving forwards towards the bolster. In actual fact, a very natural condition of the breath is that when we breathe in, the diaphragm, it presses back towards the abdomen. To feel that aspect of the breath as well. When we breathe in, the diaphragm, it draws back away from the ribs. It tends to make the abdominal area expand. So that's one aspect of the breath. But in addition to that, as we breathe in, the front ribs move forwards. It's often that action, that movement, that combination of movement with the diaphragm and the rib cage that is present in many of the yoga poses related to breath. The ribs moving away from the diaphragm. And we'll look at that more closely in some of the poses that will follow. Let's come up now. We'll work with a similar support, but heading more in the direction of downward facing dog pose. Make sure that you've got your chair now with the back of the chair against the wall. We'll remove the blanket that you may have been using, and we'll adjust the bolster position to this. So we're leaning the bolster on an angle. We're ensuring that we leave a little bit of an overlap here with the bolster. So for me it's about the length of my hand, the overlap there. It means then that when I press down onto the bolster, I get a little ledge here, a little foundation for my forehead to rest onto. If it's too high like this, it will obstruct your arms. So just enough so that we can get the forehead and the head to rest down onto that bolster with our hands onto the seat of the chair. Now, taller people and longer arms, your fingers will more than likely overlap the end of the seat of the chair. Ideally, we would have a longer seat there as we come to this position. So just have a look at the shape there from the screen, and then you can get into the position yourself. So the arms here more active than they were in the previous pose. So we're not folding the arms here, we're keeping the palms flat onto the seat of the chair, keeping the elbows straight, but allowing the weight of the body to be supported by the forehead. Really, it's leaning into the bolster. You might need to just fine-tune a little the distance of the feet, stepping them a little further back, moving them in a little closer. Important that your elbows can be straight. For taller people, that might be a little harder, but just maneuver the feet. See if you can find that correct distance with the feet away from the chair, so that you can get your elbows completely straight. So a pose that often involves considerable effort, particularly the arms are prone to fatigue when we're staying a longer timing in downward facing dog pose. Still there's work for the arms here, but the overall quality of the pose, one of being supported, relaxed and rejuvenating. That same contact of the forehead feels a very soothing aspect to the pose, helps to quieten the contents of the skull. The forehead skin just gently pulled away from the hairline. The eyebrows gently pulled in the direction of the eyes. With the eyes shut, the upper eyelids gently lengthening in the direction of the cheekbones. Check your exhalation. Make sure that when you breathe out, you're not holding back, holding anything in reserve with the exhalation. It might be more towards the end that you need to pay attention to there. That tendency to chop off and rush back to the next cycle before the exhalation is of its own accord complete. So include, as we did earlier, within the exhalation process, the softening, releasing of the abdominal area, so that the end of the exhalation, not that point when you feel the breath stopping to move within the nostrils, but that point where the abdomen has returned to a completely released and relaxed state. So making sure that we're holding nothing in reserve with the exhalation, equally checking that we're not pushing, forcing the breath out during the exhalation. Just letting the breath exit at its own natural pace. Just a hint of guiding the breath so that there's an even release. But following the rhythm, the depth that is determined by the body, by the breath. Not superimposing an artificial rhythm or depth on the breath. Okay, and then let's release, come up. We'll keep the chair, but we'll turn it around this way. We'll make a support to sit on. Let's have the minimum height one of your bolsters. Place, just to get the bolster correctly positioned, we're going to use the block a little bit like a spacer. So we've got the block this way to the wall, so the narrow width of the block that we'll place in between the wall and the bolster. The bolster firmly in contact with the block, but it just means that the bolster is just a little bit away from the wall. We'll use our second bolster at this point as a support for the forehead. So we're going to work with a few of the seated poses. We'll break them down so that we work first of all more actively and creating lift and opening in the chest, and then we'll retain that as we come forwards and release and breathe in that forward bending, supported forward bending posture. We'll work initially with Sukhasana, simple cross leg. Make sure that you've got a second block there within reach, but before we go further, just so that the bolster is where we need it to be when we get to that point of coming forwards, let's just try that now. So as we come forwards, we want to be, and I've just guessed pretty much the correct position for the chair. Maybe I'll just push it just a little bit further out, so that then my forehead, when I come forwards, can rest onto the support, but also my forearms, and I can do that with my torso being in quite an open position without the back ribs rounding or the chest collapsing. So just have the chair there ready for when you're at that point of going forwards. But before we go forwards, let's sit upright, and we'll place the second block there in between our upper back and the wall. So easiest way to do that, just with one hand to reach up and over the head to place it into the upper back. We can then bring the other hand up just to support the block as we then lean back into the block. With your fingers, just check where the block comes to. It should come just a little bit down from the base of the neck, and make sure that the block is straight so that your spine makes contact with it right up the center of the edge without it being at an angle to the spine. Once the upper back is in position, we can bring the hands back onto the bolster, and just a little bit we can move the hips back a little so that we've got that nice alignment of the shoulders being over the hips rather than the block pushing us forwards, or that feeling of needing to lean back in order to make contact with the block. Start with your hands there just onto your thighs, just leaning back onto the block. Notice how it helps to bring a nice opening to the upper part of the chest. As we now bring our arms forwards, interlock the fingers, turn the palms away, and raising the arms up to Parvatasana. So we worked with this pose in one of the recent previous classes, drawing the outer arms in and lengthening the inner arms up. Now it's that action of inner arms up that we're really looking for here, and we can connect the chest to that adjustment so that the inner arms and the chest simultaneously lift. The elbows are straight, we bring them back. As they come back, the block helps to move the chest forwards. It's more the upper chest that we want to move forwards, but just feel instead of that, often what tends to happen is that the diaphragm area tends to push forwards. We want to avoid that because that tends to harden the breath. Just to correct that, take note of the interlock that you've been using here, because we will use the alternative one shortly.
Just bring your hands back down to the bolster there, beside the hips. So we want the chest to move forwards, more the upper chest forwards, but what tends to happen is that diaphragm area tends to push forwards. Now rather than just jamming it back, see if you can adjust the diaphragm more from the base of the pelvis. So you've got the sitting bones there, and the really common tendency is to lean too far towards the front of the sitting bones. So I'm not suggesting we then do the opposite and lean into the back of the sitting bones, but just bring the back of the sitting bones down a little so that you can recreate that balance. Feel how the diaphragm sits back a little more into the body. Feel how that corresponds to the breath. A nice, smooth, even rhythm of breath results from that. Going even that little bit finer, more subtle, feel the contact of the sitting bones and let the body weight rest down through the outer sitting bones. The inner sitting bones, it's as if just a hint of lift there. We can feel the pelvic floor, it has a bit of firmness, it's not sinking down into the bolster. The navel region, it sits back into the body. Now, I'm going to come forwards. The block, it can either just drop down or we can just carefully with one hand just move it off to the side. We'll be using it again shortly as we come forwards and rest the forehead onto the bolster, arms folded, the elbows resting up onto the support. So again, just making sure that the support is helping the eyes to remain shut. So forehead skin gently pulled back towards the cheekbones, the eyelids, the eyebrows as well. When you breathe in, make sure that the eyes are completely relaxed and soft. The elbows just light in their contact so that the shoulders can soften, fall back, release down and away from the ears. During your exhalation, nice, smooth, even exit of the breath, but feel how this particular position with the bolster there and the chair, it helps to keep the chest more open whilst breathing out. So we tend to avoid that tendency to breathe out and sink and collapse in the chest that we might get in a more unassisted forward bend. Breathing out, sides of the chest stay open, the center of the chest stays open. Okay, and let's then come back to upright and we'll change the cross of the legs over and return that block into the upper back. Check that the pelvis is in the correct position. Make sure that the block is just slightly down from the base of the neck. And then as we did on that first side, interlock the fingers. Make sure you've chosen now the opposite interlock. Extend the arms forwards, elbows straight. And then raising the arms up, outer arms in, inner arms lift up. Connected to that lift in the inner arms, the sides of the chest, the center of the chest. With the elbows straight, move your elbows back towards the wall behind. And that helps the block just to a little more push the chest forwards. But find the separation, the chest forwards and not the diaphragm. Diaphragm sitting back into the body so that it can spread out with each inhalation. Now, it might be hard to achieve that with that action of the arms in Parvatasana. Bring the hands back beside the hips. Keep that active, open chest, but just soften the diaphragm back a little. Back of the sitting bones down, outer sitting bones down. Feel that corresponding firmness around the pelvic floor region. Navel sitting back. As we now come forwards, just letting that block just sit neatly nearby, resting the forehead down.
Check that it's the forehead that's resting into the support, not the elbows pushing and pressing down into the support. Shoulders release. As the shoulders release, the trapezius area, the muscle there in the upper back, the muscle and the skin there, let it gravitate down and away from the neck. With each exhalation, observe that release. The trapezius muscle descending whilst the breath exits the body. Still with the exhalation, just observing it each time it naturally comes. Trapezius descending and the chest staying more open. Center of the chest, sides of the chest. There's a bit of a natural lift there with the arms and the forehead in this position, so that we can breathe out without that feeling of the chest collapsing, compressing, retaining its space, retaining its energetic lift whilst breathing out. Okay, and then release. We'll keep the chair where it is. We'll change our leg position to dandasana. Have your feet hip width apart. The yoga chair just allows for that. Make sure that the legs are not touching the feet of the chair, but they come through the inside of the legs of the chair. And we'll place the block back into position. Let's start with the hands down beside the hips. Now some of you might be more prone to hyperextending the knees, and we've got some height there, bolster height that we're sitting on. If you need to put a rolled blanket behind your knees so that you have something to press down onto without going too far with that straightening of the knee, then do so, you've got time. Working intelligently with the muscular effort, it's not overworking today. We're really looking for these poses to have more of an impact on the breath, the way we breathe. It's not so much that we want to be fatiguing the muscles or creating hardness, stress in the muscle groups. So just enough firmness to press down with the thighs to generate lift in the spine, opening in the chest. Shoulders rolling back, the hands pressing down. Feel how the block helps the chest to stay more open. Just notice the inhalation cycle. As you breathe in, it's very natural, the abdomen expands. And we can feel during the in-breath, the diaphragm, it flattens, presses down onto that abdominal region, causing the abdomen to expand. And then just notice that when we bring the arms up, not to Parvatasana, but to Urdhva Hastasana, keeping the wrists shoulder width, the palms of the hands facing one another, looking to the screen if you're not sure, elbows straight. Lifting the arms up, but connecting that lift in the arms to the chest, so that the sides of the chest lift up. Observe it now as you inhale, a little bit less of an inclination for the diaphragm to flatten and press down onto the abdomen. It's more that it sits back into the body, and when we breathe in we get that sense, and it's often in some of these breath-related yoga poses, that the ribs lift up and away from the diaphragm during the inhalation. Feel that as you breathe in, the diaphragm, it sits back into the body, it spreads out. The sternum bone lifts and the sides of the chest lift. And we're going to come forwards, keeping that space in the chest, block just off to the side. You may need to slightly adjust your chair. I'm just bringing my chair in a little closer for this pose, so that the forehead and the forearms are able to rest onto the support. Now if you're someone who's more prone to tightness in the hamstrings, you might need to boost the height of the bolster so as to avoid rounding in the upper back, collapsing in the chest. Each inhalation working to create more space in that area between the pubic bone and the navel, creating more space in the area around the diaphragm so that the ribs there can expand. Just feel if there's restriction on the chest during breathing in. See if that movement of the sternum lifting up away from the navel during inhalation. It can be a little blocked in this particular forward bending action. So just focus on that area, create space for that area. As we did in the previous pose, make sure that the shoulders are relaxed, the trapezius skin and muscle there releasing, relaxing, dropping back away from the neck. Smooth, even inhalation and exhalation. From Paschimottanasana, we'll come to Upavista Konasana. Again, let's start with that upright version of the pose, bringing the legs apart, feet either side of the legs either side of the chair now. Same block position, bring the block into the upper back. We'll start again with the hands down beside the hips, leaning back onto the block so that the chest is open. Notice just with your natural breath here, as you breathe out, the diaphragm, it recedes away from the abdomen. As it does so, some of that pressure is removed from the abdomen, and of its own accord it sits back into the body. You don't need to suck the abdomen back, it's just a very natural part of the process. But breathing out the diaphragm, it's receding from the abdomen, it's moving in the direction of the lungs. Feel it now as you raise your arms up. So just inhaling naturally, pay attention to the exhalation, breathing out, the arms are lifting, the chest is lifting, the sides, the center, even that diaphragm area, lifting up whilst breathing out. And then release the arms down, we'll remove that block, we can put it now just off to the side as we come forward. Resting the forehead and the forearms. Bring your attention to the inhalation and just notice when we go to breathe in, as we breathe in, a tendency for the breath to get displaced, pushed out into the abdominal region. So there's less movement in the chest and more movement in the abdomen. So not forcing the breath, just noticing that aspect. Bring your attention to the diaphragm area. Ideally we want it to spread out as we breathe in. For many people there's more of a restriction to that movement in this particular forward bending posture. So just feel as we aim to spread out the diaphragm, that breath movement, it can get a little pushed, redirected, shoved down into the abdominal area, so that rather than the diaphragm expanding, instead of that, the abdomen starts to push and expand out. In a similar way, the side ribs, see to what degree the side ribs have the ability to spread as we breathe in. If they feel a bit restricted, a bit stuck, then instead of them spreading again, the abdomen gets pushed out. Those ribs around the collarbones, ideally they're involved in the breath, expanding with the breath. Here they might be a little closed off. If that's the case, when you bring your attention to the upper chest, the invitation to bring the breath into the upper chest, but instead it's more that abdominal movement where the breath tends to naturally gravitate and move. Okay, release. And with that in mind, let's come to a pose now where some of those areas, rather than being contracted, closed off, are freed up, given maximum space, and we'll see how the breath responds to that. So we'll do a cross-bolster version of Viparita Dandasana. So we'll put the chair for the moment off to the side. The most common difficulty that we have with groups of people in this pose is the tendency to set up too close to the wall. So for most people, you won't need to come any closer than a half yoga mat's length to the wall with your bottom bolster. Bottom bolster comes across the yoga mat. Taller people, you move it a little further out. We'll place a second bolster over the initial bolster. They're crossed. These bolsters now starting to age a little. They're flattening, so I'll boost the height with a lengthways half fold blanket. It's really just the top bolster I need to do that to. If you're working with older, flatter bolsters, you might need to do that to both of the bolsters in order to get some height. Taller people, you'll find that your heels can be to the floor and your head can be to the floor, and you'll see from the side your chest is a little higher than your pelvis. Shorter stature people, though, will often find that the head will not come all the way to the floor. You can put a block there if that is the case. Make sure that your feet are to the floor. It might be the sort of pose where you need a couple of goes at getting just the right distance with the bolsters generally further away from the wall. The sensation that you're looking for is that when you're in the pose, you feel that your chest is being lifted up and not your pelvis being lifted up. Just in terms of where the pelvis goes, it's not directly over this bottom bolster, it's a little more aligned to the inside of the bolster. The pelvis will sit roughly in this area when we're fully in the pose. So coming to that position now, before we go there, we can, some people like to have a rolled blanket for the shoulders to rest onto. For others, folded blanket. Just whichever you're using. I'll use it today, a rolled blanket. I've got a bit of softness here for the head to rest onto, but importantly, your head is lower than your shoulders. So shoulders will be around here somewhere, the head right down to the floor here. You can look to the screen if you're not sure. Now I've just guessed this distance, so I might need to refine it, but importantly I come into the pose knees bent. Head hangs back, shoulders are off the floor, and then pushing the legs straight. I've got my feet hip width apart. Arms can either be as I've got them here to the floor, or they can come up onto the bottom bolster. Now hopefully, when seen from the side as you're looking at me now, my diaphragm area here a little higher than the pelvis here. If the pelvis is pushed up, and it's not the alignment you're looking for, and it might become uncomfortable in the lower back. So I'm going to remain here. You can come into the pose. The head is hanging back, lower than the shoulders. I'll give you some time to arrive in the pose and check your position in the pose. Importantly, that sense of the chest being lifted up in the pose and not the pelvis being lifted up. You'll find if the pelvis is given that position of being lifted up, it often will make the lower back feel more cramped. It will also make the shoulders squash down onto the neck. Instead, we want that sense of the shoulder blades, the bit of the spine in between the shoulder blades, being lifted up and into the body so that the head can rest down onto the floor, but without the shoulders collapsing and sinking in that direction. So breath awareness, and breath awareness in terms of some of those areas that we were looking at in the previous pose, Upavista Konasana, where for many people the breath zone's a little more closed off, but feel it now, that area between the navel and the pubic bone. In the previous pose, a lot of the breath pushed down into that area. Yeah, there is some movement there, but nowhere near as much movement. We breathe in, it lifts up, we breathe out, it descends, but we can get that sense that the breath is naturally gravitating to other areas. And that area higher up, around where the diaphragm is, feel that And we breathe in, it expands, but without us sucking the abdomen down, it just sits back into the body a little. It's quite a natural action. And the breath movement is very direct. We bring our attention to that area whilst we breathe the movement. It happens as we observe. It's not that the breath movement is pushed anywhere else, it's directly in that region. The side ribs, they can spread out, direct movement. They spread out, they also move a little towards the shoulders. Even that upper chest that was more closed off, stationary in the previous pose, now it has a nice, comfortable amount of space. The breath can move in there quite naturally. The ribs there expand with inhalation, return back to their original state during the exhalation. Notice what sort of rhythm begins to emerge as we remain in this posture. A few more moments there. Okay, so for today we'll exit the pose towards the wall. Often we go the other way, coming in towards the center of the room. Let's bend the knees and then sliding the body in the direction of the wall so that the hips come to the floor. We'll just briefly lie the head back. If that's uncomfortable for your neck, you can place your hands behind the back of the skull. We won't be here for a long time, just a few breaths just to recalibrate. And then we'll roll to the side and come up, viparita karani. So these bolsters, both of them will make an ideal height here. For this pose we'll use a support for the head, one that gives cushioning as opposed to height, so just a flat blanket for the head. I've left a little bit of a gap here between the bolsters and the wall. Some people like to, as we did earlier, use the block as a bit of a spacer, just so that you can ensure that you can fit a block there between the bolsters and the wall. And it varies a little bit from person to person, but for today we want to get the lift, the support of the bolster, coming up directly into the back of the pelvis, into the sacrum. If the bolsters come too close to the wall, the tailbone tends to tip up and then the chest tends to collapse too far back away from the wall, and it starts to push into the diaphragm area, and it has that effect of pushing the diaphragm up. We want the diaphragm to release and settle back into the body. I'll be forward rolling into the pose. Equally, if you need to come in from the side, you can. The objective here, whether you're rolling in or coming from the side, is so that you can get your sitting bones as close as possible to the wall. So coming into the pose now. Make sure you've got your head blanket in position. Arms comfortably by the sides. I've got my elbows level with my shoulders and my forearms at right angles to my upper arms. Equally, you can have the arms angled back more towards the wall on a 45-degree angle to the wall or to the spine. So as we're settling into the pose, let's ensure initially that there is some lift in the legs. Don't overwork the legs. Obviously, ideally the muscles won't be feeling any fatigue during the stay in this pose, but that minimal amount of effort that you're applying, maintaining some structure there through the insides of the legs, so that the inner heels remain lifted up and the big toe bases remain lifted up, the knees straight.
The other area that we need to have some attention in terms of lift support, that region where the upper back joins into the neck. So just a little bit back from the base of the neck, that area of the upper back. Not so much a push, it's more of a lightness, just ensuring that that area is not heavy, sinking and dull, collapsing towards the floor. And more as a consequence of getting those first two elements of lift, the legs, that area near the base of the neck, there's a corresponding lift to the sides of the chest. Not sinking, but lifting up and receptive to the breath. But despite those few areas of attention, of active lift, avoidance of collapse, the very prominent aspect of the pose, that one of release, descent, letting go in a downward direction. Feel it importantly in the whole abdominal area. Breathing out, but even as you breathe in, letting that whole abdominal area relax in the direction of gravity. In a similar way, the throat, release, relax. The eyes as well, as they do in Shavasana, softening, releasing back and down and into the body. A few more moments there in Viparita Karani. Okay, so as a transition, as we prepare to come out of the pose, let's begin by bringing the legs down to cross leg. So for the moment, just keeping the hips up where they are on the bolster, knees out to the side in cross leg. Now the head blanket, you might need to just with your hands move it back a little so that it doesn't get caught up underneath you as you now slide back with your hips coming to the floor. Opposite, cross leg, the ankles and the knees resting up onto the bolsters, arms down by the sides. And then we'll roll to the side. We'll set up for setu bandha. Now we've used a fair amount of height there for Viparita Karani, but let's work a lower height for setu bandha. We'll use both of the bolsters. Let's push this first one all the way up against the wall. It will be a support for your ankles. We'll use the second bolster as a support for the back of the body. I'm just going to boost the height a little bit of these bolsters. We've got 3 blankets there, so we'll put a lengthwise half-fold blanket on both of the bolsters. The third blanket we'll use, again, more for cushioning, just flat to the floor. Now, taller people, you leave a little bit of a gap here between the T-shaped bolsters. Shorter stature, you're pushing the bolster more firmly together. It's not so important whether there's a gap here or not, but more important up this end of the support, your head and shoulders coming to the floor. This end of the bolster, it's quite a flat setu bandha. It's going to be a little higher up into the shoulder blades today. If we're going higher, as we normally do in setu bandha, we'd look to have the edge of the support a little closer to the back of the pelvis. So coming into the pose, again, it's the sort of setup you might need a couple of goes at getting the correct distance. So we come back into position. Having the bolster for the feet allows us to have the feet a little wider than hip width. Make sure your shoulders are firm to the floor but tucked under, away from the neck and the ears. Arms are out to the side, palms facing up. A few moments just to configure the pose.
similar to the previous pose, we want to have that same, it's more of a firmness here of the inner leg. So it's not that we're pressing the backs of the knees down, but just enough activity there to maintain a grip with the inner feet to the wall. It shouldn't be that the inner feet feel as if they're falling away from the wall or shrinking away from the wall. The bolster supporting the back of the pelvis, keeping it contained, lifting up into the body. Similar lightness to that area of the upper back near the base of the neck. It's more that we want to remove completely that opposite quality of heaviness, of sinking, of dullness there. And we get that balanced lift near the base of the neck. It's not the base of the neck, the area of the upper back. The base of the neck is to the floor, but the bit of the spine close to it just has that feeling of lifting up, almost a buoyant quality. And it corresponds with the chest staying open and receptive to the breath. Otherwise, the side ribs tend to sink down and then they're a little stuck when we go to breathe in. Make sure that you're getting that lift without tensing the muscles there in that throat region towards the sides of the throat. Keep those muscles soft and relaxed. You breathe in that area between the navel and the pubic bone. In some of the previous forward bending postures, that area tended to have a lot of the breath pushed down in, shoved down into that area, almost displaced to that area. Here there's freedom, movement. At the start of the inhalation, that area of the body, it sits back a little into the body, almost feels a bit of a gravitation towards the pubic bone as we start to breathe in. Don't deepen the breath, just notice the freedom of the breath across the diaphragm. No restraint there. The side ribs can spread out. Sternum bone has that freedom to move in the direction of the throat. The ribs around the collarbone region have that ability to expand with the breath. Each time you breathe in, observing that the throat stays relaxed and still, the jaw muscle relaxed and still, the eyes relaxed and still. A few more cycles of breath there in setu, bandha, sarvangasana. And then to transition from the pose, just bend the knees, bring your feet down either side of the bolster. Now it's a low support, so we can just roll to the side. If we had more height under us, we'd need to slide back, but for today we have that ability to just roll to the side, and we can then set ourselves up in shavasana. We'll use both of the bolsters today. One of them will be as a support to lie back over to help keep the chest open. So we'll use one bolster that way. We'll need at least a 3-fold blanket as a head support. So not a half-fold blanket, go higher, 3-fold, and then stiffer upper back or neck. You may even need to go higher again. We'll have another 3-fold blanket as a support for our pelvis. So the pelvis will be here, the back ribs here, the head here. The third blanket, you can use it to keep yourself warm if need be. If you are using the blanket in that way, make sure that you put the blanket on first and then the bolster. You'll know what I mean now in terms of the bolster, because we'll be lying in shavasana, but with the bolster resting onto the tops of the thighs. So here's our final position. I'll give you a few moments just to arrive in shavasana. Just as a starting point, letting the body relax to see if there's any obvious tension, tightness in the body. Just to preempt where we're going, we will be doing some
Shavasana will start to work with some lengthening of the breath cycles, continuous lengthening, so ujjayi-like breath movement, ujjayi pranayama breath movement. We'll then work briefly with some seated poses, some seated breath awareness, seated pranayama, again ujjayi pranayama, and then we'll eventually return back to this pose right at the end of the sequence and do a shavasana without the bolsters. So, just scanning the body initially for any obvious tightness, tension, gripping, using the exhalation to release if you do find any. And then more specifically, the head, just check that it's lightly resting onto the support, not pressing down. Notice if you're inhibiting a bit of a twist in the neck or the face, either to the right or the left. Just see what angle the face comes to when you completely let go of the neck and the throat. At that point, if need be, still with the head relaxed, you can just realign the head so that the nose is pointing directly up. Check that your shoulders are relaxed. And check that there is a nice, smooth, even exit of the breath during the exhalation. And that last instruction, smooth, even, and conscious release of the breath, it will start to naturally lengthen the exhalation. Go with that. We're building a momentum now towards ujjayi exhalation, a more consciously longer exhalation. So, and in terms of duration, at least double the length of normal breath, potentially triple more beyond that, but working to your capacity. And just let it be incremental the way the breath deepens. So next few cycles of breath, just that awareness of the smooth, even release of the exhalation. And that's often sufficient just to bring that extra length, time duration to the breath. Literally as if we're stretching the breath out. Taking that one step further, breathing out, smooth, even exhalation, but continuing that process until the navel area descends, releases, and relaxes. So that's the end of the exhalation, not when the breath stops in the nostrils, but when we return to that neutral position with the abdomen, navel soft, completely relaxed. Smooth, even release of the exhalation, letting go of the abdomen, but we'll add one more stage, the bolster, making sure that the bolster completely lets go and releases in a downward direction towards the floor. Have that as the end of your exhalation. So that when we breathe out, breath exit at an even rate, the abdominal region lets go, relaxes, and the body completely gets out of the way of the bolster. We remove completely that tendency for the body to want to push the bolster up and away from the ground. Let the bolster descend. And then breathing in, just let it be a natural, spontaneous response to the awareness of your exhalation. A few more cycles of longer, more conscious ujjayi exhalation, letting the bolster descend. And then bringing your attention from the exhalation to the inhalation. Initially, again, just making sure that the inhalation is relaxed, smooth, and continuous. And often that's all that's necessary just to start that process of lengthening the breath, lengthening the exhalation, inhalation in the direction of ujjayi inhalation. Notice the bolster, the weight of the bolster, feel the weight of the bolster as you breathe in, and remove again, the tendency of the body to want to resist the bolster. Let the body just soften away from the bolster, so that as we breathe in, the chest fills up and the bolster gets closer and closer to the floor without any resistance from the body. Chest inflating, bolster descending. Gradually, incrementally deepening the inhalation each time it comes, getting slightly longer, slightly deeper, as it does so the bolster descending, as if it's getting heavier on the thighs. As we breathe in, the bolster descends, also the shoulders, as if someone just gently pressing down onto them. The bolster, the shoulders, the throat. Bolster, shoulders, throat, and eyes descending as we breathe in. Finish that last cycle of deeper inhalation, but then just let the breath come back to normal breathing. So as I mentioned, we'll touch on some seated deeper inhalation and exhalation, ujjayi breathing from cross-legged position. Let's head to it now. So without rushing, just remove that bolster from the thighs. Bend your knees up, roll to the side, and we'll set ourselves up as we were earlier there, with the bolster as a support to sit on. Got the block there just as a spacer so that we get the bolster the correct distance away from the wall. We will be placing that block as we had it earlier into the upper back. The amount of height that you sit on, for some people it will be the bolster. You might need to boost the height if you're working with tighter hips, stiffer lower back. We'll be sitting up onto the bolster. We're leaving enough of a gap between the back of the pelvis and the wall for that block to fit into position. But before we get that far, just determine if you need any extra height to sit on. So just for the bolster, it should be that the knees, hips more or less level, but more importantly, the knees able to relax down as your spine and chest lifts up. We will be placing our hands onto the thighs. For that reason, many people like to have a folded blanket placed over the lap, and it just gives the hands a little bit more of a firm base. Sometimes on the knees, the hands can feel as if they're unstable, sliding off. With the blanket there, it's more of a secure placement. So just have the blanket there ready, and we'll place the block in position. And you've got a moment to get that block in position. Once it's in position, then just checking that your hips are directly under the shoulders. For me, I often just need to move the hips just back a little bit towards the wall. Let's then just start with the palms flat down onto the legs or onto the blanket, and just leaning back into the block. So it's good in that it helps the chest to be more open, that upper part of the chest. We've worked with a number of poses that have got into that area and helped it to expand. But just notice, and it might be a subtle tendency, but see if it's there, for the diaphragm area to push away from the block. Now I can actually get to the point where that region of my back actually comes off the block, so that the only contact I have is that area of my upper back is touching the block, but the bit lower down near the diaphragm is actually pushing too far forwards away from the block. Now rather than just sucking the abdomen back as we did earlier, let's adjust from the base of the pelvis. So bringing the back of the sitting bones down, letting the weight be distributed down through the outer sitting bones, the inner sitting bones, as if just a fraction lifting back up and into the body. It gives a little firmness to the pelvic floor so that the pelvic floor doesn't have that feeling of sinking, of collapsing, and it sits the navel back into the body. And it gives us a more even contact with the back onto the block. So the upper part of the back near the base of the neck, firm contact. The area down near where the mid-back is, diaphragm area, also some firm contact. Let's now place the hands the opposite way. So the backs of the hands are down, the palms of the hands are facing up,
And then just maneuver the blanket if need be so that you can slide your hands back until your elbows are level to the sides of the torso. And then just relax the shoulders, relax the arms, the hands, but the block helping to maintain that lift in the spine and the chest. Pay attention to the upper back, that contact near the base of the neck. Without losing that contact, start to bring the head down to jalandhara bandha. It's where the chin comes down to the notch there between the collarbones. As the head comes forwards, make sure that you've kept that contact with the block. So the whole contact with the block, mid-back, all the way up to near the base of the neck there. So that the contact there with the block is nice and even and constant as the head comes down to jalandhara bandha. As the head comes down, make sure that the jaw muscle is relaxed. Make sure that the tongue is relaxed in the mouth. Make sure that the lips are soft. The eyes shut with the upper eyelid, as we had it earlier, gently being helped by the support that we were resting on. The upper eyelid releasing towards the cheekbones. And start to gradually deepen the exhalation, so breathe in and then letting the breath out at an even rate. Consciously lengthening the breath, making it a more consciously long exhalation. But whilst breathing out, you're monitoring the breath for evenness, smoothness, but also monitoring the upper back there, making sure that we retain that contact with the block in the upper back. It gives us that sense of breathing out. We had it in some of the earlier poses. Breathing out with the chest and the side ribs lifting up a little. So that we don't get that sense of the chest losing its energy, collapsing and sinking. Breathing out, the sides of the ribs lifting, the center of the chest lifting. Breathing out, the trapezius descending. Finish that longer ujjayi exhalation and keep the head down in jalandhara bandha, but bring your attention now towards the inhalation. We want you to do just a few cycles of touching on deepening the in-breath now. We'll do it just bit by bit, so bring your attention to the inhalation. We breathe in, the starting position for the in-breath is with the navel just sitting back a little towards the spine. It should come quite naturally as a consequence of the block that you've got positioned there between your upper back and the wall. Navel sits back, the lower side ribs spread out, the breath then moves in and it moves up the sides of the chest in the direction of the armpits. Imagine someone just gently pressing down on your shoulders with their hands as you breathe in. Shoulders release down. Now, really common, breathing in and the head tends to lift along with the breath. So just synchronize there, the chest lifting, expanding, the head releasing down, throat soft, jaw muscle soft, tongue and lips relaxed, eyes shut. Breathing in at your own pace, gradually lengthening, deepening the inhalation. As you breathe in, shoulders releasing down, the skin there at the backs of the arms releasing, gravitating down, as if it's dropping towards the elbows as you breathe in. Continue at your own pace, just a spontaneous exhalation, but a more consciously guided, deeper inhalation. Whilst breathing in, there's a common tendency for the arms to feel as if they get pulled a little towards the shoulders. Instead, as the arms relax, be sure that it is the case, the arms relax, the backs of the arms down, the knuckles just a little bit as if they're gravitating in the direction of the knees. Remove completely that tendency for the knuckles to feel a bit pulled back towards the elbows whilst breathing in. Let the knuckles just gravitate a little, very gently in the direction of the knees as you breathe in. The height of the inhalation, eyes relaxed, temples relaxed. And then complete that last deeper ujjayi inhalation. Once it's complete, let your head come back level, still with the eyes shut. From there, slowly open the eyes. We'll just remove that block and we'll finish now in our shavasana, just a neutral shavasana. We'll take a half-fold blanket for the head. All of the other bits of equipment we'll put out of the way. Make sure you're keeping yourself warm. Commonly you will need one of your blankets there to place over yourself in order to stay warm. And then lying back and releasing in shavasana. Just allowing the breath and the body to soften, release, let go of all tension in the body. Each exhalation, using that time to drain tension from the body. Again, checking with the relaxed out breath that you're not restraining the breath in any way. Equally, each out breath, making sure that you're not pushing the breath, forcing the breath out in any way. The height of the inhalation, the depth of the exhalation, not as high, not as deep. Sitting more level now. But still that rhythm of the breath, very apparent, clear on the breath. So not so much that the breath cycles start to slow down, just that the height of the inhalation not as high, depth of the exhalation not as low. More even and smooth transitions between the two extremes of the breath. The breath rhythm at this point almost has a sense of being completely involuntary. We've done that process of working through the poses. They set up a nice even rhythm to the breath. Now we just give over to the breath completely and rest in that very natural and spontaneous breath rhythm. A few more moments there, quiet in shavasana to finish. Take a couple of slightly deeper inhalations as you prepare to come out of shavasana. From there, bend your knees, feet flat to the floor. Bring your hands across your chest or abdomen. Eyes open. And then, as you're ready, roll to the side and come up. Thank you for practicing with Yoga Selection.